Salutations, Internet. My name is Keyshawn Diaz. My channel is about things that fascinate me, like programming, 3D modeling, 3D printing, art, and technology. From time to time, I'll talk about anime because I love anime and it inspires me. So, welcome to our Odyssey, where we're about to embark on an epic journey into the world of programming, 3D modeling, and tech. Whether you're a curious newbie or a seasoned explorer, this is the perfect launch pad for your journey. I would like to eventually create a VTube here in this channel where I have a VTube avatar that I talk with. I think it's interesting. I think it would be fun. And I'm going to record and show the process of me creating my VTube character that I'm going to be using in the process later on. Today, we're diving headfirst into the magical realm in a series of basic programming fundamentals. But fear not, we'll keep it fun, engaging, and most importantly, understandable. So grab your programming helmets and buckle up because we're about to blast off into a wild world of code. Later, we will get into frameworks and other languages. Now, let's talk about IDEs. IDEs are basically development areas in which you will program in. You can choose whatever IDE that you like. I personally like VS Code. Now you can think of variables as a little container where we can store all sorts of treasures, numbers, words, and even emojis. They are like the backpack of programming, holding all our essentials. And just like in real life, we can change what's inside our backpack whenever we want. It's like having a magical bag of holding in the coding world. In order to use JavaScript, we have to use something called HTML. I will create another video explaining about HTML and CSS. Right now, I want to be able to focus on JavaScript and the variables and other things within JavaScript. But HTML is basically the structure that is like the frames in a house. We use HTML to build the frames of a website, and we use CSS to style the house, put on the drywalls, the paint, the colors, things like that. And JavaScript does the action like opening doors and closing the doors of the house and making actions happen. There are different ways to run JavaScript within an HTML script. Most of the times you would have the HTML script tag inside of either the body or the head. In most cases, you would see it in the head and it would look like this, where the script is in the head of HTML. I will explain more on this in another video. But as it stands, for right now, we're going to place it in the body. This has its own advantages. Placing it in the body, especially at the bottom of the body tag. So we have the body tag and the head tag. Placing it into the body tag at the bottom of the body tag allows this tag to observe everything that is above it in the body tag. What do I mean by that? You can have other things like an H1 tag, and it would be able to see what is everything above it, where it can then manipulate those things. Having it down here is one less step than having it in the head. Because having it in the head would mean that you would have to use a on-loaded event listener. And that is not a problem, but I like using it in the body for my own preferences. Inline script looks like this, where you would call the script tag, and inside of the script tag, you can write your JavaScript inside of the script tag. Now, I'm using an external script tag, which basically is a script that I have located inside of the same folder as the index.html. If you want to learn more, I will show you a video or create a video on this. I plan on creating a video on this so that I can explain just the basic structures and syntax of HTML and what you would need to at least have an HTML page to appear. So right now, I have created an index.html file and a variables.js file inside of a JS folder. And this is inside of my folder named My Intros. It can be in a folder like how I have it, but it has to be in the exact same directory that the index file is in. In order to create these files, you have to have the extension at the end of the name of the file .html for the HTML file in which the code will reside inside of the tags, and a .js file. When we come to CSS later on in the series, CSS basically has a .css at the end of the file name as its extension. This is all used so that the computer can understand what exactly each file is and what it does. As of now, I've created the script tag that basically points using the source attribute, and it points to the JavaScript file that I have created. This is how we will be able to communicate with the web browser with JavaScript inside of the HTML tag. Right here, we have an empty script, and I named it Variables.js because this episode is going to be on variables. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people who explain coding and explain it, very good. This is, something that I think would be a fun thing to talk about because I find programming very fun. So this is how we are going to test our code. I'm going to write an alert. You can either call it a method or a function, depends on where you're at. In Java, they normally call it a method. And this alert will basically say, okay, JavaScript is running. So now at this point, we are going to open up our browser that will allow us to see what is happening inside of our code. So let's open up the browser. I have Chrome that's open and that is running my file. If I refresh the page, it says, okay, JavaScript is running. That means that my script is currently running at this current moment in time, and now I can code. Now the thing with IDEs is that this particular IDE, you can have things called plugins or add-ons that basically add features to your IDE. And I haven't set those up yet because I just like doing it manually, but there are ways of making it better, and eventually I will get to them when I'm ready to get to them. Now we should begin to talk about variables. The thing about variables is that we can name the variables anything you want, but there is a standard that you should follow and syntax that should be adhered to. We are going to get rid of this alert. First, when creating a variable, it is best not to use numbers as the first character of the variable. There are different methods of creating variables like camel case, lowercase, capital case, and underscore in the variable name. All caps are used for constant variables. I will explain more about these variables later. Naming a variable should have some meaning in it. This will help you to understand what it is for, and it will help you to later use it in the manner in which you intended. Storing data in a variable is easy. All you need to do is use an equal sign after the variable has been named. Then pass in the variable after the equal sign. Something like this. We're going to use var, and var is a syntax that basically allows you to create a variable. Now there are other ways of creating variables, and I'm going to name this variable, and I'm going to equal this to 0. And what I've done is I have now instantiated this variable, equaled it into a value of 0. So what is inside of the variable add is 0. If we were to call this variable add, it would then console log or display in and show that the variable is equal 0 or is 0 at this point in time. Note that other languages such as C++, C# and JavaScript use types to instantiate their variables. What do I mean by types? Such as things as integers, floats, vectors, and such. These allow it to have a distinct way of keeping track of what the variable is. In JavaScript, you don't have to worry about this type base, well, at least in vanilla JavaScript, because there are other forms of JavaScript. But in vanilla JavaScript, you don't necessarily have to worry about this type scripting, where you have to instantiate what the variable is, if it's an integer, if it's a string, if it is a vector or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter in JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript. Now, what do I mean by string? If you don't know what a string is basically a character to a sentence or word that is basically in the form of characters that is understood by us, and is normally represented in double quotes or single quotes in JavaScript. C++, C#, those languages, especially C++, which is more strict, basically would have you use single quotes for a character and double quotes for a string. Let's get to it. The thing is with JavaScript is that it is a type of dynamic scripting language. And so the thing about variables is that it doesn't always have to be initialized with a value. What you can do is also have the variable set to a value of nothing or undefined or an empty variable. Now, you would have to check later for this if it is undefined or if it is empty or null. But most of the times, if you do this, you have to know exactly why you're doing this. Let's say, for instance, you do not want the value to start off with anything at all, and then you want to be able to pull information dynamically and put it into the variable as it is being ran or called using Ajax or fetch. You can do it in that manner. Because it started off undefined, it can cause problems later. So variables can be initialized later on in your code by calling the variable down the line of the code. So let's say, for instance, right now we have this variable called var add, and we equal it to 0 again. And if we console.log this variable, what console.log does is that it shows what is inside of the object. So this is the development console. So if I was to refresh the console after saving, then it will show that at line 2, it is currently 0. This is what this console log is saying. So later on in my code, I can then call add and then equal it to 2. And then I console log this variable. And then when I save and refresh it, now you will see that inside of the variable is the number 2. Now let's use this variable to add something to together into it. So I'm going to copy and paste this code, and I'm going to say 2 plus 1. And what's going to happen is that inside of this variable is going to become 2 plus 1, which will then be stored in the variable as 3. So if I refresh the development console, 3, most of the times what you would want to do is you actually want to separate these into different variables. Such as, let's say, for instance, we have variable x and y. And what we want to do is then store inside of the variable x and y is equal into 2 and y is equal into 3. And what we will do here is then put x plus y, and that will then be the value in which we will receive, which is 5. Now, let's say, for instance, you don't want to be able to change the variable later on in your code, because this is very valuable in JavaScript. It's flexible. and it allows you to do different things. But what you can do, which like I said earlier caused a problem, is you can then set add in JavaScript as a string. That's why a lot of people like TypeScript and C++ and C Sharp, because you have to instantiate the variable with a type. So what happens is that when you use a string, a character, or something else later on in the code, you will end up calling out here. So right now, instead of it being an integer, it's actually a string at this point. So let's say, for instance, you're working on this code with one of your buddies, or you're working on this code with one of your coworkers, and you decide to allow this to be visible to those individuals, because there are ways of making it not visible to the outside code. And they decide to use add instead of it being add as a string, and they change add as a variable in there. So then you come back into another part of the code thinking that the variable is actually a number, but then you end up with a string. And all of your data that you had from before could be lost. Now, if you're passing down information like this is bad, but at the same time can be useful in certain situations. So what do you do when you do not want a variable to be changed? You would have to add something called a const variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to say const, and we're going to name this variable pi, because we want to be able to use pi. And the thing with these constant variables, you have to use capital letters. It's proper etiquette to use capital letters for your name. And what a constant does is that it protects that piece of information from being changed later on in the code. It would throw an error saying that this code, this variable, cannot be changed. So let's say, for instance, you want to multiply 2 times pi, and whatever that value is will now be 6.3 based off of what we have multiplied. But let's say, for instance, we want to change what is in pi later on, and we want to say it's equal to 4. What will happen is that it will then tell us that this is an error, and it will say that a constant variable was assigned, and this means that you cannot change a constant later on in the code. So it's a form of protection inside the fact that this constant variable will be used everywhere in your code and will not be changed so easily. This would be useful to say, for instance, you want to be able to draw a circle or structure or something in the code that will never change. Basically, let's get rid of that error. So in this lesson, we went over variables. There are a lot more to learn. Like, for instance, you can also learn the different types of ways of calling variables, such as let. And we're going to call this one doing this. And what I've done here is I have done camel case. This is what camel case looks like, where you have one lowercase beginning and one capital case at the end, or you can have multiple capital cases going up and down. And there is another one where you can have let. You can do other forms of variables where you can have let basic underscore things is equal into here, or maybe let's just say hello. And you can also do things such as having a number in there. You can have a number in there, even though I said that it is not a good thing to have numbers in there in the beginning. Like, for instance, you can't have 2b into a variable. It won't even let you do that. It will say this error. This is a bad thing, that if you were able to do it, then this could be a bad type of naming convention. But you can do b2 because it is after the fact. Now, you don't really need to do it this way, but you can, and reasons why you would do that. And what we have here is underscore and capital. The first letters are capitalized in this one. And most of the times what it means when you have all first letters in the first letters in each word in the variable capitalized, is most of the time it's either a class or a function that you would use most of the times, which I'll explain in the next few episodes about functions, that you would have to follow a convention. Now, don't get me wrong, you can name a function lowercase, all lowercase. You don't use all caps, and be mindful that you may not be the only one with function. You might be a part of a team, and you have to follow a standard in which everyone in the team knows exactly what is the code about and what exactly has to happen in the task. And in the way that you constructed the code, all of you have to follow the same way, otherwise you'll just be confused. So